It doesn't take a massive earthquake to shake an entire region. Sometimes all it takes is the right depth, the right location, and a fault that's been waiting far longer than anyone realizes. On the night of April 14th, 2026, a magnitude 4.5 earthquake struck near Orange in New South Wales. By global standards, that's modest, but this one was different. It was shallow, just 5 kilometers beneath the surface, and it hit in a place laced with old, buried fractures. The shaking travelled far, reaching towns hundreds of kilometers away, and it didn't happen in isolation. It happened right beside one of Australia's largest mining operations, Cadia Valley, raising a question that's difficult to answer but impossible to ignore. Was this earthquake entirely natural, or was it nudged into motion? What makes this event stand out isn't just the shaking, it's the context. For this part of New South Wales, this is the largest earthquake recorded in years. Not the largest in the state and not even close on a national scale, but locally it's significant. And that matters, because earthquakes are not evenly distributed across Australia. They cluster, they repeat. And when one happens in a place that has been quiet, or appears quiet, it tells you something about the stress that's been building beneath the surface. To understand this earthquake, you have to start with the land itself. The region around Orange is not tectonically dead, it only looks that way. Beneath the rolling hills and farmland lies a network of ancient faults, fractures in a crust that formed hundreds of millions of years ago, during the assembly and breakup of old geological terrains. These faults don't disappear with time, they remain, locked and invisible, storing stress from the slow but relentless movement of the Australian plate. Australia sits in the middle of a tectonic plate, far from active boundaries, but that doesn't mean it's stress-free. The plate is being compressed from multiple directions, pushed from the north by interactions with Southeast Asia and the Pacific, and influenced by distant plate boundary forces. That stress has to go somewhere, and often it finds its release along these old, inherited weaknesses in the crust. Most of the time that release is subtle. Tiny micro-earthquakes occur constantly, too small to feel. Occasionally something larger happens, a magnitude 3, maybe a 4, and people notice. But every so often conditions line up just right. A fault reaches a critical point. The stress exceeds the friction holding it in place, and suddenly the ground moves. That's what happened here. The depth of the earthquake is one of the most important clues. At around 5 kilometers, this was a shallow event. That matters because shallow earthquakes transfer more of their energy to the surface. There's less rock to absorb and dissipate the seismic waves, so the shaking feels stronger and travels further. That's why this quake was felt so widely, far beyond what you might expect for a magnitude 4.5. But depth also matters for another reason. 5 kilometers is within the upper crust, the same general zone affected by large-scale mining operations, and that's where things get more complicated. The Cadia Valley Operations sit directly in this environment. This is not a small mine, it's a massive long-lived operation extracting gold and copper from deep underground using a method known as panel caving. Unlike traditional mining where ore is carefully extracted, panel caving works by deliberately collapsing large volumes of rock. The ore body is undercut, and gravity does the rest. The rock fractures, breaks, and caves in, creating a slowly propagating collapse zone that moves upward through the crust. This process is highly efficient, but geologically, it's anything but gentle. When rock is removed or collapsed at that scale, it changes the stress distribution in the surrounding crust. The weight that once pressed down on deeper layers is reduced. The surrounding rock adjusts. Some areas experience a drop in pressure, others experience an increase. Stress doesn't disappear, it moves. Now imagine a fault sitting nearby. It's already under stress from regional tectonic forces. It's been locked in place, perhaps for a decade or longer, with friction holding it shut. It doesn't need much to fail. A slight increase in shear stress or a small reduction in pressure clamping it closed can be enough to push it past the threshold. That's the key idea. Faults don't need to be created to produce earthquakes. They just need to be pushed. So could mining at Cadia have contributed to this earthquake? The careful answer is this. It's possible, but not proven. There are a few reasons why the connection is being considered. The proximity is the most obvious. The earthquake occurred right next to the mine. Then there's the depth. At 5 kilometers, the event sits within a range where mining-induced stress changes can have an influence. And finally, there's the pattern of aftershocks, smaller tremors that followed the main event, clustered within the same general area. Taken together, these factors suggest that mining could have played a role, but that role, if it exists, is likely subtle. In seismology, there's an important distinction between causing an earthquake and triggering one. Causing implies that the earthquake would not have happened at all without the external influence. Triggering implies that the earthquake was already going to happen, that the fault was already critically stressed, but something accelerated the process. Mining, when it is involved, usually falls into the second category. The stress changes from excavation and caving are typically not large enough to generate entirely new earthquakes on intact rock, but they can alter the timing of an event on an existing fault. They can reduce the stability of a system that is already on the edge. So in this case, if mining played a role, it likely acted as a trigger, a final adjustment in stress that allowed a pre-existing fault to slip. But there's another side to this story. The region has a known history of seismicity. It's not highly active, but it's not silent either. Small earthquakes have been recorded in the area for decades, and a magnitude 4.3 event occurred nearby in 2017, well before the current phase of mining at Cadia reached its present scale. That tells you something important. The system is capable of producing earthquakes on its own, and that's why proving a direct link is so difficult. To definitively connect the earthquake to mining, you would need detailed data. You'd need to know the exact geometry of the fault that slipped. You'd need high-resolution seismic monitoring to pinpoint the rupture location relative to the mine workings. You'd need stress models showing how mining altered the stress field at that depth. And you'd need to compare the timing of the event with mining activity, blasting, caving progression, extraction rates. Without that, you're left with a correlation, not causation. Still, the possibility is enough to matter. Because what this earthquake reveals is not just a single event, but a broader truth about the landscape. This part of New South Wales is not as stable as it appears. It's a region where ancient faults still exist, where stress continues to build, and where human activity can interact with natural systems in ways that are not always obvious. The shaking that people felt from Orange to Batemans Bay was the surface expression of something much deeper, a release of energy that had been stored in the crust, perhaps for decades. And perhaps most importantly, it demonstrates how sensitive these systems can be. The damage from this earthquake was relatively minor but still telling. Across the Orange region, residents reported cracked bricks, shifted masonry, and minor structural damage to older homes, especially those built with unreinforced brickwork. These kind of structures are particularly vulnerable to short, sharp shaking from shallow quakes. There were no widespread structural failures, no major infrastructure damage, and no reported injuries. But the event was strong enough to rattle buildings, knock items from shelves, and send people outside. At Cadia Valley Operations, underground workers temporarily moved to refuge chambers as a precaution, and operations were paused while inspections were carried out. It's a clear example of how even a moderate earthquake, if shallow and close to populated areas, can still produce noticeable, and in some cases unsettling effects at the surface. So, in this case, a fault can sit quietly for years, doing nothing, and then with just a slight change in conditions, it moves. Whether that change came entirely from natural tectonic forces or whether mining played a small role in tipping the balance is something that may take time to resolve. But the earthquake itself has already told us what matters most. The faults are there, the stress is there, and under the right conditions, it doesn't take much to set them in motion. I hope you found this as interesting as I did, and as always, thanks for watching. Before I end this video, I'd like to give a big shout out to my Patreon and YouTube members. Thank you so much to everyone that helps to support this channel.